Well, folks, an hour's a long time, but hey, with everything that's going on with Ohio State football across the Big Ten and the landscape of college football, much to get to here in the next 60 minutes. Leave those comments and questions right here on Buckeyes Live, right here at the Voice of College Football with college football. Much to get to.
Sorry, that's my echo on my end.
From Buckeye Huddle, of course. Tony, thanks for being here, as well as Steve Hellwag and Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, how we doing today?
Doing well. Sorry about that echo. That was on my end. So.
You're good. You're good. It's probably a little overbearing for people to hear me just once. So twice is probably completely out of the question for some people. They've probably tuned out by now, but we'll keep going. Well, Steve, Ohio State is the number 2 team in the country, according to those 13 that hold all the power in college football.
Yeah, that's what they were in the AP poll and the coaches poll. Not that those are the overarching, overriding things in the world. I'm kind of in a little cocoon here. So I see the big games. I know that, Tennessee beat Alabama a few weeks ago. And Georgia stomped Oregon way back at the beginning of the season. So I know the big ones, but I can't get too deep into the weeds to do a resume search on all of these top 8 or 9 teams that we think are going to be in contention for these 4 spots. I know Clemson and TCU are both undefeated and both have defeated 3 or 4 ranked teams. Ohio State's beaten 2 ranked teams, one of which is no longer ranked, Notre Dame. The other one, Penn State, I think is a pretty good team that beat an SEC also ran Auburn that just fired its coach in their stadium, beat them like a drum. And, Auburn's not going to really make many waves in the SEC this year, so you can't really hold that up as, look, Ohio State did this to a team that did this to an SEC team. So, it's all apples to oranges comparisons in some regard. And, a beauty contest in other regards. And the neat thing about it is, of the teams that are at the top, we know Georgia is going to play Tennessee, and we know the winner of the Georgia-Tennessee game is probably going to play Alabama, barring, 2 more losses by Alabama. They're going to be in the SEC championship game, or 1 more loss. Is LSU right on their heels, or what?
They are. If LSU wins this Saturday, they're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, so any rate, I can't imagine that's going to happen, though. And I think LSU is an okay team, but, Tennessee just completely obliterated them. So I don't know. Again, it's all apples to oranges, and there's so much more football left to be played that we will know. I think last year it was pretty clear who the top 4 teams were, and they took those 4 teams. As you looked at it, Michigan had beaten Ohio State and Cincinnati had beaten Notre Dame. And so it was obvious why Ohio State, Notre Dame got left behind and the other 4 schools got in. So I think we'll have much the same thing happen this year.
Well, Steve, I'm guessing that between the 3 of us, we've got your resumes covered, because I think from what I know of these other 2 and myself, we're big on resumes. So here we go, Tony. So I'll tell you 2 things before I'm going to let you go on what you think is important here. One would be, for me, it says a lot when TCU's number 7. So they sent us a message right there. TCU's behind Alabama as an undefeated team despite the ranked wins. Number 2, 1 week from now, let's see where that Georgia-Tennessee loser drops. How far do they drop? That's going to be considerable.
Yeah, Mark and Kevin and myself, along with Tom Orr, were live during the reveal for about 2 hours last night, and then I jumped on the call as well, the teleconference with the committee folks, so that I could get all of their lies into my ears firsthand. But it feels like TCU is the floor for the SEC 1-loss teams. Like Tennessee or Georgia is not going to fall below TCU because Alabama is already there. And that's very unfortunate for TCU. And just listening to the way that Boo Corrigan would justify teams over others, and sometimes it's number of ranked wins, sometimes it's number of wins over 500 teams, just whatever they need, that's what it was. That was one of the. I think they used the Clemson has 5 wins over 500 teams, and Michigan has 2, so they used that for their part of their reasoning for having Clemson over Michigan. But yet, you look at TCU, and I believe they have 5 wins over 500 teams, and Alabama has 3, and yet Alabama also has a loss, and they're still ahead of TCU. Even LSU being as high as they are, they have 2 losses. Penn State has 2 losses. Penn State has lost to the number 2 team and the number 5 team. LSU has lost to Florida State, and they have beaten Ole Miss, and yet they do have a common opponent in there in a trip to Auburn, and Penn State blew out Auburn. LSU beat Auburn by 3 or 4 points, held on for that win. So it gives you plenty of evidence that they love the SEC per usual. I believe it is the top undefeated team is an SEC team. The top 1-loss team is an SEC team. Top 2-loss team is an SEC team. And then you get to the bottom where you have a 3-loss team in Texas who played Alabama. So they are effectively an SEC team this year for Alabama's purposes. So more of the same from the committee.
And a 2-loss SEC team in LSU that's far above a bunch of 1-loss teams. Kevin, what hit you the most out of the rankings unveiling?
Just the fact that we all like to get outraged about it. We go in saying, I'm not going to be outraged. I'm not going to be outraged. And then we're outraged. I'm just kind of sickened by the ACC love in the bottom of the poll, the NC States and the Wake Forests. I don't get it. I know that at some point you run out of 2-loss teams and you have to just start putting people in there, but NC State doesn't have Devin Leary anymore. I just don't know how they get to some of their methodology in terms of that. Is that in order to boost Clemson's claim when that comes in, because Clemson is drawing dead. They play nobody the rest of the year. I mean, I know we look at these percentages of who you got and what that means for your percentages of going 12-0 when it's gross. I just don't like it. I mean, I don't like the way that they handled, I think LSU was ranked way too high. I was shocked that Michigan was where Michigan was. At least I'll say that I agree with how the top 3 was. I mean, I could have seen it any way on there, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I felt that they did a good job at the very top of it, but I feel like in terms of how they kind of filled in the rest of it, it just felt kind of agenda driven.
This is an incredible number. I counted this up as I did my top 25 on Sunday. There are 42 6-2 or 5-3 teams. And there's a glut of them in the ACC and the SEC. And the issue that I have in ranking these teams is many of the 5-3 teams, I think, play much more difficult schedules and therefore accumulated those 3rd losses because of that. And just trying to compare teams and then dipping into the group of 5, which obviously isn't an issue in terms of getting the 4 right, because that's a complete non-factor this year. So Tony, do you think we're headed toward chaos, or do you think it will all work itself out?
I think you are heading towards some chaos in terms of, one, the SEC and getting 2 or 3 teams in there. Which 3 teams of the 2 teams? Because right now we're headed for a 2 SEC team playoff. I think if Tennessee and Georgia, whichever of those guys lose, they're going to be in a as long as they lose this week and then don't lose again, you're going to have people clamoring for that loser, because all their lone loss this season has been to the number 1 team in the nation. If Alabama goes in and then beats the winner of that in the SEC championship game, then obviously then you have the loser of the championship game should be in along with the winner. So at this point, I'm trying to figure out a way that there's only that the SEC doesn't get 2 teams in here, and it's going to require Clemson to be undefeated. I would say it requires TCU to be undefeated, but we don't even know if that will be good enough. And so at this point, I think you're going to see 2 SEC teams, and not that they haven't earned that, because Tennessee kind of has thrown a wrench in everything. Tennessee is the chaos this year that has created a lot of this, and it's like, well, it's chaos, but it's the same story again, where you've got two SEC teams in there, and then Clemson playing nobody and getting in, Ohio State almost playing nobody, or Michigan playing nobody other than each other and getting in. Kind of the same story, but Tennessee at least adds some drama to it.
I want to hear everything that you guys have to say about this whole thing, but let me make one statement, because this is part of the nightmare scenario that I'm sure you all three have thought about. Georgia beats Tennessee. Georgia goes to the SEC championship game. Alabama beats Georgia. We've got two 12-1s in the SEC and an 11-1 with what's considered the best win in the country over Alabama. That who do you leave out, and how do you leave out one of them, versus especially if Clemson and TCU can't go undefeated and they're one-loss champions, then the SEC, I'm not saying that they're going to put three teams in, but I don't know how they differentiate, except for obviously Alabama as the champion gets in.
Yeah, I mean, if the conference championship is worth something, or having that 13th data point is worth something, I mean, you gotta put up or shut up. I mean, you gotta say, all right, well, I mean, you at least have to have that. And we've certainly seen times where teams that have not had a conference championship data point, even being in the game, get special consideration. I mean, we don't have to look very far from the beat that we cover to get to that point. But we're not talking, there's a difference of talking about, okay, well, who's the Big Ten team that goes in or whatever, versus, oh, how are we going to put three SEC teams in there? I mean, I understand that we're toward the end of the life cycle of the 4-team playoff, and, maybe there's adherence to rules might not be as strongly followed at this point, since, well, we're just going to rip all this, up and start over anyway. But I think that the team that doesn't get into the SEC championship game, sorry about your luck. Enjoy New Orleans. I've heard that the oysters are fantastic at the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I'm just of a mind that it's all going to work out, and I know that's crazy. I always get shouted down when I say that, but I think logical people will come to the conclusion of how it should go. And the nature of these games, I mean, Tennessee beat Alabama on a field goal, at the end. I mean, it wasn't like they dominated the game. It was at Tennessee. You have to give Alabama some benefit of the doubt for that. And yet Alabama hasn't played particularly well, all season long. We saw scraped by Texas A&M, and so on and so forth. But again, I want to see how these teams finish the season. This is just the starting point. I mean, how many times have the first four in these rankings made the final four in these rankings? Not all that often. And obviously one team's going to fall a little bit down the line after this week. Obviously with the loser of this game, I mean, Georgia's a double-digit favorite to take care of Tennessee, but Tennessee is playing as well as anybody around. They didn't have a hangover after the Alabama win. They went out in a rivalry game against Cooter from Kentucky and, took them to the woodshed. So, for the Daniel Boone Trophy or whatever. So, I think that, they deserve credit, and Hendon Hooker's playing great football, and Georgia's going to have to come up with a way to stop him. I think somebody on Twitter posted the last thing Georgia wants is a shootout, because Stetson ain't going to win that one. So I don't know. I think we're in for a fun game Saturday at 3:30. We'll be doing the interviews after the OSU Northwestern game with an eye on our phone to see what's happening with the Tennessee Georgia game.
Well, I can talk about this all day and get what you guys different scenarios would play out, but it's somewhat meaningless, even though it's a lot of fun to figure out, because there's so much more football left to be played. And we know that there are collision courses like the one this Saturday and the one at the end of November in the Big Ten. And then there are going to be 2 or 3, most likely, if history repeats itself, 2 or 3 outlier upsets that surprise everybody that are going to jump out. Notre Dame, Clemson, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever those are. But my goodness. Who do you think is the lowest team? to me, the lowest ranked team right now that controls its own destiny is Ole Miss. Certainly, they can run the table. They win the SEC. You're in if you win the SEC. Illinois sitting at 16. They beat Michigan and Ohio State, or Michigan twice, and are they going to be able to rise to a top 4?
Well, we've seen a Big Ten champ left out before, but that was a 2-loss Big Ten champ, if I recall, back in 2016 with Penn State. So I still think Illinois would make it with wins over Michigan and Ohio State. How do you leave them out? Their lone loss was the season opener. I do look at Alabama's schedule, though, and they've got at LSU and at Ole Miss these next 2 weeks. I'm thinking they could pass Michigan or Clemson with those wins, as much as the committee likes the SEC. But I still think a 1-loss ACC champ, being North Carolina, if they can do that, 1-loss Big Ten champ, as you said, Ole Miss being in there, even, Oregon, USC, are we convinced that are we convinced that 1-loss Pac-12, Big Ten champs, and ACC champs, that there's 3 spots for them in the playoffs?
I think chaos is almost unavoidable, or an argument. People aren't going to consider it chaos, maybe, because some people just say, well, the committee selects the 4 best teams, so what's the chaos? The chaos is that there are other teams that have earned a resume that's similar to one of the teams that are included. All right, if anything else to say, Kevin, Steve, anything else on the rankings? All right, Kevin, this Penn State game, how do you interpret pluses and minuses? And you know better than anyone, you 3 know better than anyone, and what I've been talking about all week, because people want to know and people have their opinions on how does this compare to Michigan, Penn State? So take it from there.
Well, I'll start this by saying, once again, the transitive property does not work in football. So you can't sit there and say what Ohio State did in State College is, you can extrapolate anything that goes to what happened to Penn State playing Michigan in Ann Arbor, and you can't do the same with the Iowa game or the Michigan State game. About the only thing you can say is, at least Ohio State didn't have to, deal with a tunnel, one tunnel. It's a case of where Ohio State did what it needed to do. Ohio State had played one road game previously, a Michigan State team that really didn't show up in that game, a Michigan State team that is just woefully undermanned, and it's showing. It's showing this year. Ohio State was challenged. You need to have those types of games where you have your back against the wall, and that you know how to respond to adversity. And I'm not saying that necessarily makes Ohio State better than Michigan, because you just need to have those games. And we're seeing a Michigan team that's getting punished in terms of the rankings due to not having much of a conference schedule. But in hindsight, Ohio State's conference or non-conference schedule wasn't all that great either. I don't look at this as Ohio State, versus Michigan by proxy in terms of what they did against Penn State, because it's just not how anything works. So, I see an Ohio State team that went in, took care of business, certainly showed some issues once again in terms of, they need to do a better job running the ball. They need to do a better job in terms of, cleaning up some penalties, even some things that I didn't necessarily know were penalties, in terms of Cade Stover getting dinged for a couple of false starts that obviously looked like offside to me, but apparently, and Ryan Day explained a rule that it didn't sound like he was completely, 100% down with either. So, when I look at this, I don't look at it in terms of what Michigan did to them. Yes, Michigan absolutely blew the doors off of Penn State in the second half. It was much more of a game in the first half. They just absolutely, dropped the hammer on them, ran for 4 bills or whatever it was they did, and led to the to the early season Heisman campaign of Blake Corum at that point. But I think what Ohio State was able to do in terms of scoring all the points that it did in a 9-minute window, et cetera, is equally and differently impressive. So I don't know. Maybe I was the wrong one to ask first because I just kind of have some mixed feelings about how things work there.
Tony, go ahead if you're ready.
Well, I was just looking at a tweet here regarding Ohio State's performance against Penn State and Michigan's performance against Penn State, and how Michigan's performance is held up as being so much better. And the tweet here is that Ohio State had a 20-point lead with 2:42 left in that game, and Michigan had a 17-point lead with 5 minutes and 4 seconds left to go in the game. The difference was that Michigan added a touchdown on their end, and Ohio State gave up a touchdown in garbage time on their end. And somehow it looks so much better for Michigan. I would say this. Last year, Ohio State beat Michigan State by 49 points. Michigan lost to Michigan State by 4 points. Ohio State lost to Michigan by however many points that
15.
they did. And so the transitive property, if it actually worked, Ohio State should have beaten Michigan by, I don't know, like 46 points or something. And that didn't happen. So I guess math is wrong.
Well, I just scribbled it down here, within our own personal text chain. Somebody sent the tweet that Nicole Arbach said that, you got, why is Michigan 3 spots behind Ohio State when they throttled Penn State by 24 and Ohio State slumped by to beat them by 13. And that disavows the idea that they've also played 2 other common opponents, Iowa and Michigan State. And as I just jotted down all of the margins of victory, Ohio State won those 3 games by a combined 86 points for an average of 27, I think, 28, 29 maybe. I don't know. I can't add or subtract.
It's 86-59.
Yeah, 86 to 59. 59
Yep.
for Michigan over those 3 games, an average of 19 plus. So Ohio State beat those 3 opponents by an average of over a touchdown more than Michigan did. So I agree with Kevin. None of it matters because they're going to play each other at the end of the season. And to get wrapped around the axle about where one is and one isn't, I think that's endemic of the fact that Ohio State did play Notre Dame, a 5-3 team in the non-conference, whereas I think Michigan's 3 non-conference opponents probably have a combined record of 3-12 or something at this point. So, and none of them are Power 5 teams. So I just throw that 3-12 out there because it could be better, it could be worse, but it ain't off by a whole lot. I mean, has anybody heard of Hawaii, Colorado State, or whoever the other team, UConn, beating anybody of note? I don't. I mean, maybe they have an average of 1.5 wins between the 3 of them. I don't know, but Ohio State gets a little bit of credit for beating Notre Dame. We're splitting hairs and talking about stuff that really doesn't matter in the end-all be-all of the whole thing, because as it was pointed out here, you could start out as low as 16th and still win this thing. That's what Ohio State was in the initial rankings in 2014, and they ended up getting in number 4 and winning it and becoming the first number 4 seed to win a college football playoff. Kind of cracked myself up there. So, any rate, a lot of football left to be played.
Well, and the committee chair, Boo Corrigan, did mention Michigan's terrible non-conference schedule, terrible being my word, as one of the reasons they are below Clemson. Because you look at Clemson, and not that they have played these non-conference games yet, but they still have Notre Dame and South Carolina to come. But Michigan's schedule, it's just you can't. I think the committee didn't feel like rewarding them for that. Not that Alabama has I guess the Texas game stands in there, but there's no need to reward Michigan for that right now when you can reward them later on for beating Ohio State and Illinois. Even though
you make a really good point there. I think Illinois will cancel out Notre Dame for Ohio State, because if we were trying to compare the 2 resumes, because Ohio State's not going to play a crossover opponent as good as Illinois. So, if you just, and this is my thing on Notre Dame, I've always said this, people, they don't play a conference championship game. Look, their 1 through 12 is as good as anybody else's 1 through 12. They just don't have, 13. So, Ohio State's 13 is Arkansas State or Northwestern, just excise that and just look at Ohio State's top 12, including a conference championship game, it's probably going to be pretty comparable to whatever Notre Dame plays 1 through 12.
Well, I
And
think
the
this
same thing
underlines,
applies in this case with Michigan.
I think this underlines Steve's point, and Steve, you can correct me if this is not what I got out of what you said, but I totally agree with the strength of schedule. There's a number of fallacies in the strength of schedule, and one is that beating the 80th best team in the country versus beating the 115th best team in the country, who cares? If you're one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the country, you should smoke both of them by 35 to 50 points. So what does it matter that you're playing UAB, who's the 90th best team in the country, or you're playing Connecticut, who's 125? At that level, It doesn't really matter. What might be interesting is I posted a video, folks, if you want to check it out. I compared the numbers for Ohio State against Penn State, Iowa, and Michigan State. And I won't go through it here because there's a video, but I'll cut to the chase of the bottom line. If we believe in yards per play against those 3, Ohio State's at 7.35 and Michigan's at 5.98. So that's about 1.5 yards better. And what might be surprising against those 3 is Ohio State has actually played better defense yards per play against Penn State, Michigan State, and Iowa than Michigan has, and has a +8 versus a -1 in turnover margin. And that can be calculated. There's different perspective on that. That's randomness. Ohio State's been lucky, that you can't depend on that. Or there are teams that have explosive guys like the guy with the JTT. Yeah, that guy. Guys like that are difference makers that can actually make plays, Kevin. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was one of those types of outings that you're just going to think back on in 15 years and be like, wow, I can't believe I saw that. And, well, whatever the new format of media is at that point, have it like beamed right into my brain or something so I can go back and relive it and tell everybody, yeah, I was there and I saw him do all of these things. But we get so lost in the minutia of this number and that number and everything else. It'll all sort itself out when that, November 26th or whatever it is, when these 2 teams play. Obviously both sides are popping off pretty loud in terms of their fans about, this is what Ohio State's going to do. This is what Michigan's going to do. But there certainly are a level of truthers out there that for whatever reason just don't want to give Ohio State any credit for anything, who are going to have this view that why is Ohio State ranked where it is? And you know what? It's part of what makes this what it is. I mean, if I go to a sports bar tomorrow night or something and get into a conversation about Ohio State, I'm sure there'll be somebody in there that just generally that feels that Ohio State's ranked too high or whatever. And I'll probably use some of those numbers. You may have to email them to me. So I may have to use some of those numbers in terms of the conversation. Not that I have to be the arbiter of all things Ohio State, but I think I picked a career path that has made me the arbiter of all things Ohio State whenever I'm out amongst friends or whatnot. So we'll see.
Mark, I think those turnover numbers also have decreased Ohio State's yards per play, because if they had a larger field, those numbers would be higher. And we saw that against Iowa, where they just that affected what they wanted to do and affected the deep shots that they wanted to take, because there was no deep field to do that with. So you take some of those turnovers away, and the offense is going to look even more impressive, in my opinion. Regarding JT Tuimoloau, I think that's I don't know if it's the best individual performance we've ever seen, because we've seen some good ones over the last few years. Jackson Smith and Jigba and CJ Stroud both in the Rose Bowl, Trey Sermon in the Big Ten championship game, Chase Young's 4 sacks against Wisconsin. But what JT Tuimoloau did that was special is every single play was huge. It was a huge impact. It wasn't just a second down sack or whatever that in Wisconsin, Chase Young sacks. I don't know what downs they all came on, but JT Tuimoloau was doing something. He created 4 turnovers and scored on one of them. And the plays that he made, the way he made them, getting those interceptions, the sacks when they came, it's just the impact overall. I don't think Ohio State has ever seen that before defensively. You can argue offensively with the guys I mentioned, but that was by the end of it, it was almost comical. Like the pick six was just like, that's just the cherry on top. Of course that happens. You never see, you hardly ever see that happen. And then for him to just snatch the ball out of the air and run, it's like, well, that makes all the sense in the world, because I've seen an incredible performance to this point, and here he comes out for the encore and he plays his big hit.
Yeah, it's like that song that they like to dance to, like a thief in the night, before the games and everything. That's what Ohio State was. They were a thief in the night. This game was trending toward Penn State. It was 21-16 with just under 9 minutes to go. Ohio State got the ball back, and Stroud hit 2 passes to Harrison, like 19 yards, and moved him down into Penn State territory. And then they hit him with the run, which hadn't worked the entire day. And they caught him off guard with that. They were on their heels and weren't expecting that. We're thinking, oh, they're just going to keep throwing it down the field. And whoop, there goes Henderson through this huge hole over the left side, and he's gone for the touchdown. And then JT Tuimoloau creates the fumble, knocks the ball away and recovers it himself. They throw the touchdown pass to Cade Stover, who refused, to go down, would not be denied, rumbling, bumbling, stumbling, bouncing off people. And they went from down 5 to up 9 in a span of about 45 or 50 seconds on the clock. And I think it was a shockwave that kind of went through Beaver Stadium there. And it became, it went from the loudest place on the Eastern Seaboard to, quiet as a church at midnight. Basically, there just was nothing going on there. And in fact, a few minutes later, the fans were gone. They picked up and moved on back to the tailgate. So, to me, that was impressive for Ohio State, that in the fourth quarter, after battling, dead even for 3 hours, in the final half hour, Ohio State had the stamina to pull through and win that game and make those plays. And it was JT Tuimoloau with the cherry on top with that pick six at the very, very end to finally tell them, drive safely. Thanks for coming today. The next home game's in a couple weeks against nobody, and nobody cares because you got 2 losses and you're out of it. Sorry. So it was not a whiteout. It was a stripe out. And as always, you got smoked. And, I don't know. Penn State is a good team, and maybe they'll win out. Maybe they won't. I don't know. But to me, to go in there and one of the toughest places to play in the country and to come out of there with that type of a win, to me, that says a lot. This team grew up quite a bit. And those are the kind of wins like they had in 2014, where they had to win in double overtime there, that you have to have along the way to build that character. So when the chips are down against Alabama, the chips are down against Georgia or Tennessee, whoever you may play later on, that that you've been in this tough situation before, and you were able to come through. And to me, it was interesting that the highest ranked player on the field was the one who stood the tallest. I don't think anybody had anybody ranked number 1 or number 2 overall nationally, did they, on the field? I think Tuimoloau was in the top 2 or 3 nationally in his class. And lo and behold, the cream rose to the top, and he had the kind of game I think people have been waiting on him to have since he came on campus a little over a year ago.
Tuimoloau was interviewed on the Big Ten Network on Monday, and Dave Revson was leading into the segment, and it was like he was kind of phonetically going through the pronunciation. And then he even said on the air, he goes, I guess I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce his name. And I thought, I know you're not a recruiting guy, Dave, and I've got all the respect for Dave Revson. I'm like, have you been paying attention to college football the last couple of years? That's why we were all on alert when he was announcing his decision. That's who this guy is.
Just wait until Palaie Naoteote has to play a bigger role or something else. Then heads will really explode.
But that was what all the hoopla was about when he was making his college decision.
And now everybody understands exactly why. And and he was worth all of the time at the airport. He was worth all of the mailers and all of that stuff. And now the expectations are going to be ramped up even more. And if he only finishes with 2 interceptions this season, like what the hell's going on?
Yeah, I did some research. The last time an Ohio State defensive end had 2 interceptions in one season was Mike Vrabel in 1995, and they were in separate games. I'm not sure when or if a defensive end has had 2 interceptions in one game for Ohio State. And somebody way back when, I think Jim Marshall may have had a couple touchdowns on defense, but that would have been in the late 50s. If that's even the case, I don't know. But and whether or not he was a, quote, defensive end or whatever they called them way
Did
back
he run
when.
the wrong way?
Yeah, I don't. Not then he didn't.
Okay.
I think he was headed the right direction on those, but I don't know. It was unprecedented what he did to have 2 sacks and 2 interceptions and a touchdown and another tackle for loss and the fumble forced and a partridge in a pear tree. I mean, he had a little bit of everything in that game.
All right, Steve. The downside, though, they couldn't run the ball. Couldn't run the ball until about 10 minutes left in the game. Mayan Williams, of course, left the game. That has a lot to do with it. But what do you make of that for a second consecutive week?
Yeah, I think Iowa had a good plan, and obviously Penn State had a good plan to say, no, you're not going to establish the run. If you're going to throw the ball over the top on us, then so be it. But yeah, Ohio State has really struggled running the football the last 2 weeks, and it shouldn't be like that. And I think it's just a number situation that they're just being outnumbered in the box, and they've got to do something to get people out of the box. They tried to throw those screens to get people to leave the box to go outside, and they didn't block the screens worth of crap. I think Fleming struggled on one of the blocks and maybe Stover on a couple of the blocks, but you know, the design on some of these plays just hasn't been what it needs to be. And I don't know. I think they're back to the drawing board again. And we said it, I may have said it last week, that the threat of the quarterback run isn't there, although he did run it a few times in this game and even had an 11-yard run, which is almost unprecedented. I was in the parking lot and before the game with a couple of guys from my hometown, and the one guy says to his buddy, he goes, over under on Stroud touchdown runs in this game. And you know, the obvious answer is a half, you know, 0 or 1. And he bet the guy that he would have 1 touchdown. And it was, they had the ball at the 1-yard line. You thought, well, maybe he'll take the quarterback sneak and try and score himself. And then he said over under on Stroud rushing yards. And he was like 15, something like, well, he had 11 on one play and ended up right around, I don't know, maybe 8, 9, I think, net or whatever for the game. But, you know, it just, if you just added that dimension, you know, what would it mean? I don't know. It might help things out a little bit, but they don't want to get him banged up. It's certainly not going to run him against Northwestern, Indiana, and probably not Maryland. So, it might be a while till might be until his last 3-4 games as a Buckeye before they unveil that.
Kevin,
I don't know if I have anything to add there. You know, it's the running game. Certainly, you know, you sat there and you saw a running game that worked very well earlier in the season, and then they go against some teams that are pretty stout against the run, and they just can't seem to do much. You know, I think one of the big things that we took out of the Ryan Day presser yesterday was where there were some talks about Ohio State's tendencies and running always out of the pistol or whatever. And you know, I think that Ryan Day was a little incredulous at some points about where things were. Well, we had, you know, out of the pistol. I mean, we ran 5 times and we were successful. You know, we were successful on 4 of them. And, you know, I think that we're going to go into a game with Northwestern where we're going to see what the line is able to do, because it's not necessarily going to be a case of Trevion Henderson or Mayan Williams out there. I think that both of them are going to get hall passes for that game. I think it's going to be Dallin Hayden and Chip Trainum that are going to be doing a lot of things. And I think that if the weather in Evanston is blustery in terms of windy and rainy and everything else, that maybe Ohio State does put a little bit more emphasis on the ground game and getting some of these things fixed over these next 3 games before you have to sit there and get into a knuckle buster against Michigan, a team that's going to prove once again that it is stout against the run. Michigan's come into this game in previous years pretty solid against the run, and Ohio State's been able to solve that riddle. It couldn't solve it last year, and that, I think really is going to be a huge difference. I mean, Ohio State has put together 8 quarters of where its run offense has not been all that great. So you got to work on it, and they're not going to be able to do it with their 1 or 1A backs this week, in my opinion. So, this is I guarantee you that Justin Fry and Kevin Wilson have been working extra hard with the line in terms of trying to get some things there, because if we're being honest and you go back and watch the tape, the interior line didn't have a great game against Penn State. Matt Jones had his struggles. Donovan Jackson had a couple struggles. Unfortunately, Luke Whippler kind of just gets wrapped up in that. So it's just the interior line. So they've got to figure something out, because it's going to matter soon. It's not going to matter on Saturday, but it's going to matter soon. And you can't just sit there and flip a switch and suddenly have it fixed. It's something that is a work in progress.
Yeah, Ryan Day was pushing back at the idea that running every time under center and running every time in the pistol was tipping their hand and causing issues with the run game. And I think there were times where Penn State was absolutely convinced that Ohio State was running the ball, and they were correct. But when you look at the fact that of the 46 times they were in shotgun, they ran the ball 7 times. 6 of those times they averaged less than 2 yards a carry. The last time was the 41-yarder by Travion Henderson. So they weren't tipping the runs in the shotgun, and they couldn't run there either. So I think the issues are more about the offensive line and finding the right running plays rather than the fact that they're tipping stuff. Because really 4 or 5 runs out of the pistol, that's really not enough to base a tendency off of. Running under center every time is something that they've done. They run more out of from under center than they throw by far, and that's something that they had a tendency of doing last year. So I think people see it and they expect it to happen this year, and when it does, then people jump on it. Other times, like out of the pistol, they threw the play action to Julian Fleming last week or the week before against Iowa. So you break those tendencies at the right time. They didn't do that in this game, this past game, and you wait to do it maybe for Michigan, but they were successful running out of the pistol, but they weren't really successful running anywhere else. And I think that's the larger concern. 2 weeks in a row now, under 100 yards rushing. That doesn't happen at Ohio State, not 2 weeks in a row. And you can't just boom, flip the switch back on. And I said this before, I don't care what happens in the next 3 weeks. It won't tell me anything about what they're going to do against Michigan running the ball. They can average 300 yards a game the next 3 weeks. It doesn't mean anything, because we saw them running the ball very well coming into the Iowa game, and we've seen what's happened since. So they need to fix that, because at this point, if other teams can stop it and make Ohio State one-dimensional, yeah, Ohio State has been able to throw the ball, but like Ryan Day has shown, like he will remain. I need to be balanced. And at some point, like you look at the Utah game, I think they threw balance out the window. It's like, we got to go win this game. And they did. And I think he might have that sort of come to Jesus moment with Michigan as well, where it's like, you know what, we're just going to have to throw the ball because nothing else is working. And this is working. And it was working against Penn State as well.
Did we all think the 3rd and 6 call with Travion Henderson right up the gut in the red zone at the time was to set up a 4th down conversion, and then they trot out Noah Ruggles, and you think, okay, were they just trying to prove a point?
That's one that's hard to like, and I don't know that he has talked about that one. We threw a bunch of questions at him after the game, and then yesterday, I don't know about, he mentioned that one. I don't remember what his thinking was on it, but to me, it felt like they were setting up a field goal and they just wanted points.
Yeah, that's what my impression at that moment was. A couple of the decisions that seemed weird to me were you're up a point, and the obvious little card thing says you go for 2. Having a false start I can't, if I was a $10 million a year college football head coach, I can't imagine that a 5-yard false start penalty would dissuade me from going for 2 just because they moved it from the 3-yard line to the 8-yard line. And yet he did it twice. He pulled the offense off the field and put the kicker out there to make sure they got the point. I don't think your odds of scoring from the 3-in-1 play, although it eliminates the run as a possibility, I guess, as opposed to the 8. I mean, the bigger thing was, to me, you'd really rather have a 3-point lead than a 2-point lead, because a 2-point lead can be usurped by a field goal. So, a 2-point lead is the same as a 1-point lead, basically, at that moment. So I don't think there was any risk in either of those situations had they left the offense on the field to try and go for that extra point and get the lead out to 3. That way you were field goal proof, where, if it did kick a field goal, you were the worst figure, you would go to overtime. But, that's kind of nitpicking as well. Maybe that's just his personal preference, that it takes half your play sheet away from you, that you can't run the quarterback draw or run some kind of power running play that, could power it in from the 3-yard line. But, again, small things that again, I didn't understand how on the second or third play you threw the ball for 37 yards down the right sideline to Marvin Harrison and didn't go back to that for almost a full quarter. That to me was a little bit mind-numbing, that if they're stacking against the run and they're giving you man coverage outside with the best receiver in college football, why aren't you testing that more? Marvin Harrison did have one of the best days, that any OSU receiver could have. I mean, 10 catches for 185 yards, no touchdowns, but he converted 10 first downs. 10 of his catches, or rather, that's not true. He had 10 catches. I don't know. I'm off base.
They were all for first downs, I believe.
They were all for first downs. Is that correct?
I believe that was in the game notes from Jerry Emig.
Okay. Well, 3 of them were 3rd and 10, including the one on the drive late in the game where they're trying to melt the clock, need to move the sticks, and he catches it on a slant pass, it looked like, or a crossing route, and got lit up and still got the first down. That was critical play, and he converted a 4th and 7 as well. So what he means to this offense, he and Stroud are basically the co-MVPs, I would say, right now of the offense. Stroud probably the MVP, but Harrison is right there with him. And if one of them wins the Heisman and one of them wins the Blitnikoff, I wouldn't be surprised.
Just real quick on the 2-point conversion thing, because I'm with you, Steve. But he kind of lucked into, when they decided to kick the extra point instead, he kind of lucked into having a 9-point lead then at 30-21, which could have been an 8-point lead had they not gotten it, had gone for the 2 and not gotten it. So they kind of lucked into that one. I also think that you go into every game with a 2-point play or a couple, and sometimes now you have to probably have 3.
Didn't have it from the 8.
No.
Better start working on them from the 8, because know that full start's coming, bro.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, do you go with because they have plays and situations.
I need the Annie Agar flag going up in front of me here.
Do you go with a 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, like something like that? And so it's like, you know what, just kick it and go on to the next play. I think maybe that probably had something to do with it as well.
Yep.
The 4 of us in Yakov probably not surprised that Ohio State may win a Blitnikoff this year, but we just probably pegged the wrong dude coming out of August camp. Yakov, we appreciate that.
The good thing for Marvin is that everybody knows his name. Unlike JT Tuimoloau, like everybody knew his name before he came into Ohio State, and he's got that name recognition like a politician. The last name Kennedy, boom, you've got a pretty good shot. Marvin Harrison having that name and then having that Rose Bowl to set him up for this year has been huge. It is interesting that Ohio State has not had a Biletnikoff winner since 1995, Terry Glenn. My memory of that one was as they were announcing the winner, and it's like, and your Biletnikoff award goes to Keyshawn Johnson starts to stand up in the crowd. And then it's Terry Glenn, and Keyshawn Johnson has to sit back down. Now, I don't know if that is – if I go back and watch it now, who knows if that's actually how it happened, but that's how I remember watching it live as a sophomore at Ohio State.
Just give me the damn Biletnikoff.
Throw me the damn trophy. Here you go.
Sorry, bro.
Oh man, Terry Glenn. My goodness. All right, Tony, where can we find you? What do you got working this week?
You can find me at BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can find me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman. We're going to be dropping some plenty of podcasts this week. Like I said, Kevin and I and Tom Moore just dropped an hour and a half to almost 2 hour show from last night that you can find on your podcast feed, Buckeye Weekly Podcast. In terms of what I've got working on this week, just team coverage, and I don't even know specifically. I just wrote about the coaches, Ohio State Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, saying they expect and hope to have Jackson Smith and Jigba back this year, which is exactly what they would say. You would expect them to say, but I don't think anybody's expecting him back soon.
Kevin, what do you got going on this week?
Yeah, it's Wednesday, which means it's Tail of the Tape Day. I dropped it early, so it's already out there on Buckeye Huddle, so you can find it there. I'm going to be recording a Big Me kickoff probably later today to run tomorrow, talking with Louis Vicker of Wildcat Report to talk about this game, because I figure somebody needs to talk about it because it's not getting a lot of ink out there. And I'll follow that up with a Behind Enemy Lines for those that are not podcast inclined. But if you're watching this, you're obviously podcast inclined, so just look for the Big Me Kickoff at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle.
Mr. Hellwagon.
Well, this is Hell Week, as it might be, or Hell Month with the advent of Ohio State basketball. We had an exhibition game last night, so we're doing double duty, covering two of these teams at once, and doing the best that we can to keep our head above water right now. And obviously looking forward to the trip to Chicago, probably something along the lines of what we saw there, that beat down on a Friday night in 2019, 52-3. Poor Fitzy. He's going through a rough patch there, but the good news for them is they're going to replace Ryan Field with some gigantic stadium, and better days are coming for Northwestern football, certainly, because looks to me like they have all the makings of a 1-11 team this year, the way that one's going, and the quarterback's been injured and everything else. So looking forward to that, and just keeping real busy at bucknuts.com and at Steve Hellwagon on Twitter.
Well, let's get there. Let's talk a little Northwestern. We got a few minutes here. So Pat Fitzgerald made history there as a player. He's made history on a positive note as a coach. Now he's trying to go full circle, I guess, and bring Northwestern back to what it was in the 1980s, I guess, because they're awful. And this is now going on 2 consecutive years and 3 of 5 that it's just horrible football.
Yeah, they're supposed to be good in even years. I mean, going to the Big Ten championship game in 18 and 20, but that is not going to be the case in 22 unless they buy tickets. They're bad. They're bad. I mean, they have an NFL caliber left tackle in Peter Skoronski. I like Evan Hull, who's their running back receiver hybrid type. And that's really kind of about it in terms of what they have. Ryan Helinski has not been playing. They've been playing their other quarterback, and it's kind of just more of the same there. I think their leading receiver, or their leading rush is 29 yards this season, their longest run from scrimmage. It's just a mess. I mean, they put up 13 points on Iowa, and I'm not even sure how they managed to do that. At least after football, they'll all probably get really good jobs with their Northwestern degrees, so I'm not going to shed many tears for them.
Northwestern shouldn't even have the win that they have. But, I guess you still get credit for beating Nebraska these days. But it's just so painful. And the thing is, I wonder what kind of tolerance do they have for Pat Fitzgerald? Because you understand there are going to be some rough years, a 5 and a 7, a 4 and an 8, but that's followed by a 9 and a 3 regular season. You've got this buoy, and how long can he live off of 18 and 20? Even though he's had good years before that, they're going to have patience because it's Northwestern, but you need to see some results. You need to see some recruiting. You need to see some fight, some just not 42-7 to Wisconsin is terrible. I mean, they've got 3-4 close losses this season, and that's kind of his thing. And it got Scott Frost fired, but I don't know are these guys looking better for next year? I don't think you can assume that, the next year's a 7-win season, and then everybody's going to be seniors at the right time, and they're going to win 10 games. Like, you've got to time it so right at Northwestern. Right now, they have no timing at all.
Spencer Petrus's QBR was 80 against Northwestern, and they had 400 yards of total offense. Iowa did against Northwestern. That's how bad Northwestern is, because Iowa couldn't do that against FCS teams.
Well,
Yeah.
when Cade McNamara is at Northwestern next year, they'll finally have a quarterback.
Ohio State beat Iowa by 44 points, and then Iowa turned around the next week and beat Northwestern by 20. So, Kevin's transitive property, just apply that. But, the line is 38.5, and it just doesn't feel like it's nearly enough. I mean, as I said, 52-3 there 3 years ago is kind of the blueprint, because I just don't see how they're going to move it against Ohio State's defense. I know Ohio State's defense gave up some points and some plays to Penn State, almost 500 yards actually to Penn State. But, those, you got to tip your cap to those guys. I mean, Clifford, he played, other than his 4 turnovers, he played a pretty good game beyond that. I mean, it's like, other than the iceberg, the Titanic was really a great cruise. But I mean, they did move the football, and Ohio State did give up some yards, but I can't imagine Northwestern's going to have more than about 200 yards in this game. And again, Ohio State's at that point of the season where, get the guys who are healthy some work and get them out of there before they're no longer healthy. I mean, I think that's probably, you're going to take 72 guys or whatever the list is, and you're going to play 72 guys probably.
I think Northwestern had, I'm looking it up right now, I think they had 177 yards of total offense against Iowa. I've got it right.
It was really bad. And only a handful of rushing yards, like 19 rushing yards.
Yeah, 18 net rushing yards. I mean, it was not pleasant to watch. I chose not to watch it, and I support that decision wholeheartedly. Evan Hull, 11 carries for 32 yards. Tyus, who's their backup, 6 carries for 15 yards. I mean, at least Sullivan, their quarterback now, was 23 of 30, but even for that, it was 159 yards. Just a lot of little dink and dunks. If the weather is, as I said, is cold or rainy, and it's not necessarily going to be cold, but rainy and windy, and Northwestern is forced to run the ball, I don't see them doing anything whatsoever. Yeah. I had to write my prediction for a piece today, and I couldn't bring myself to pick a shutout, but it was so tempting. But S happens, and I just wasn't ready to sit there and make that leap. I just couldn't get there.
My issue.
Go ahead.
My issue is that to watch more Northwestern would mean, or any Northwestern means, I'd have to watch more Iowa. And so I have to check my DVR. Like, do I have the Maryland game? Maybe is the Maryland game on there? Because I don't want to watch any more Iowa. And I do see Brendan Sullivan, their quarterback, did rush for negative 42 yards on his 14 carries. So I don't know how many sacks that is, but every time he ran the ball, he averaged a 3-yard loss. So fun times in the old town tonight.
Yeah.
Iowa had 7 sacks in that game.
There you go.
Eesh. Yeah. And now they're playing Tui Maloau and Zach Harrison, who have been, 2 of the most on-fire defensive ends in the country here the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, it doesn't bode well. Again, as I say, perhaps this is a game where Kyle McCord could get a full quarter of action maybe and get him some reps and some throws and see what he can do. Would be a perfect time to kind of prime him. And I made a point with, or at least I asked Brian Hartline about this. You look out there and it just seems like it's the same 3 guys every play. Fleming, Harrison and Agbuka. And I think there's a diminishing return to that at times. And he pointed out, well, they have had Stover play some in the slot as well, moving over from tight end and taking one of the receivers off the field when they go to a 2 tight end set. Maybe he and G. Scott are both in the game together. And there were some reps. Obviously, Harrison took a bad spill and left the game, but it was only for a couple plays. He was right back in there. It's almost uncanny. You can't do anything to hurt this guy either. And Xavier Johnson got in there for a few plays. Jaden Ballard, to me, has been woefully underused this year, but they want to go with their primary guys, and that's kind of the way that they always have looked at it. But to me, you're getting 9 games into the season now. Might be time to develop 4 and 5 just in case you need 4 and 5 at some point down the line in the playoff or whenever. But maybe this is a game where, Ballard and Johnson and those freshmen also get a little bit of a run as well. Was it Burton and Grays are the other guys there in that group? Maybe that if they go on this trip, maybe they can get some reps too.
Buckeyes Live, folks. We're here for you every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, courtesy Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Huddle. Also join him on Buckeye Weekly, his podcast that drops just all over the place. We can't even keep up with it. Kevin Noon below me, the Big Me Kickoff podcast, and also, of course, BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. Tale of the Tape has been released, so catch that with Kevin and Steve on Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, thanks for making this all work and happen each and every week. And you guys get paid to watch that game on Saturday.
No, get paid to go to Chicago for the weekend. It's kind of looking at it.
Better.
I'm not, we're going to get in the car. I'm staying in Midway, which is like may as well be in another country. And, just because we fly in and out of Midway, and I want to be able to get out of my hotel bed on Saturday morning or Sunday morning and go straight to the airport right there was the rationale for all of that. But it is about, as Kevin O'Neill was the coach at Northwestern basketball, and they asked him, they were playing a night game at the United Center, and he said, well, did you get to come down and have a shoot around at the United Center this morning before the game? And he's like, well, we thought about that. And we honestly, there was time. They offered us the time. We could have done that, but we would have needed an Army helicopter to go from here back up to Evanston and then back down to the game. So we won't have an Army helicopter, but we'll get in the rental car bright and early, probably 8 a.m. and get up there to Evanston and be one of the dozens or so people there when they open the gates. And 11 a.m. local start, noon on ABC. And Ohio State, Penn State did 8 million people, one of the better ranked games of the season for Fox this past week at noon. The Ohio State Northwestern game on ABC is going to do about 1.5 million people and will not be one of the better ranked games of the season, my prediction.
Most people just want to tune in to see, how ugly it could be, or some. Let's see if JTT can score a couple touchdowns this week again or whatever. All right, guys, so much appreciated. Have a great week. Enjoy the game and safe travels.
Thanks. See y'all.